Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program Matt Lewis, who is VP of Business Development at Geodis. And today we're going to talk about realities and misconceptions of the 4PL relationships. Now, when it comes to working with logistics partners, manufacturers and retailers, their expectations and their needs, have changed a lot over the past few years. And and so has the logistics service provider market. In questions such as, what is a 3PL? What is a 4PL? I mean, the answers to those questions are different today than they were in the past. And yet there's still some confusion and misconceptions out there, especially when it comes to 4PL relationships. So what are some of those misconceptions? What defines a successful 4PL customer relationship today? Well, those are some of the questions we're going to discuss. And, it's great to have Matt on the program who is on the front lines of this day in and day out to share his insights and advice on this topic. So, Matt, welcome to the program.
Thank you for the invitation, Adrian. Appreciate it.
Now, Matt, you're a first-time guest on Talking Logistics, and like I always do whenever I bring someone new onto the program, I'm always interested in learning how and why they got into this industry to begin with. So, before we dive into the topic, why don't you briefly tell us a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved with supply chain logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Geodis?
Okay. Well, I got into logistics really from grad school. I have a master's from the University of Tennessee, which has a very strong program in logistics. And from there, went into a variety of industries, but really got involved in this 4PL space, beginning with Anderson Consulting, which is now Accenture. And that led me into IBM, where I did a number of jobs relative to logistics, whether it's strategy planning or procurement. And I was over in Asia leading our Asia Pacific Logistics Organization, and we decided to go the 4PL route as an IBM and decided to design and develop our logistics organization into a 4PL model and then divest it. So I led the divestiture of that piece of business into the market, which Geodis ultimately won. And then subsequently, and actually I stayed and built the control tower that then managed Geodis. So I had to design and develop that as well. But subsequently, I went to Geodis, and since then, I've been selling this solution to other customers. And we have a number of very large customers in automotive, consumer goods, oil and gas, aero and defense, industrial. So we've really been able to expand this 4PL model, and it's something that I've been living really now for about 15 years.
Yeah, wow. And also, so pretty interesting. So starting from the consulting world, then really being kind of on the shipper side, if you will, and kind of being in the front lines of this, and now obviously on the service provider side. So you've got the unique perspective of kind of coming at it from all angles. So let's get now with the topic. I mean, kind of like I kind of mentioned in my opening comments. I mean, although the term 4PL has been around for a long time, many people still are confused by it, especially as it relates to other terms like, 3PLs or logistics outsourcing, more generally. I mean, what defines and differentiates 4PL from, outsourcing, other outsourcing models and approaches?
Yeah, for a very simplistic approach, 3PL really began because shippers were really dissatisfied with the number of disparate relationships they had. They really wanted to have relationships with the niche and the most affordable suppliers, but they didn't want to have thousands of relationships. So they began to bundle those into fewer players. And 4PL was really just an extension of that model. But then now it takes into aspects more than just the physical logistics, but now thinking about elements of procurement, elements of IT, and elements of finance, right? So if you think of 4PL, it really has four disciplines. One is the procurement element, and these are disciplines that are traditionally been part internally of the shipper, right? So it's an evolution of the outsourcing model. So procurement is holding the contracts, so establishing relationships with the series of suppliers on behalf of the customer, right? The other is IT, which is now setting a single backbone for the customer. Right now, they probably have many disparate relationships with different suppliers where the data is coming in very different formats. It's fragmented. It's not in the same format. It's not standardized. And this enables the customer to get a consolidated view of that data. Operations is more of an alert management approach where the physical scheduling of the shipments is still occurring very much at the 2PL, 3PL level, but this is the actual real-time resolution to those issues, whether it's mechanical or a weather or whatever. The alert occurs within the system, and the 4PL then takes proactive action to try to solve that. And then the last element is finance, right? There's a lot of freight bill validation that goes on, freight bill audit, and even the payment, right? So again, these are pieces that were traditionally within the company that are now really 4PL. And what really leads to this is a company has to come to the conclusion of what is their core competency. Whether it's automotive, it's R&D and mechanical quality within the machine. If it's oil and gas, it's exploration. If it's aerospace and defense, it's the quality of the product, right? But it's not really logistics. That's not to say logistics is not critically important. For each one of those customers is incredibly important, but that doesn't mean it's their core competence. They all have a finite level of cash, and they've got to decide where to put that cash. And logistics is probably not the core investment that they make. So they have to come to the decision first that it's critically important, not a core competency. So these are elements of their business that they really don't need to be best in class at. There are partners out there that can do that for them. But there's also a lot of confusion in the market about the terminology. What is LSP? What is LLP? What is 4PL? What is control tower? And you can't really go anywhere and find that definition, right? So we try to simplify that to say, when you hear the word control tower, from our perspective, that means it's someone dealing with specifically shipment visibility, and dealing with a sub-element of a customer's business. That might be a geography, it might be a product type, it might be a plant. But when you move to the word LLP, that's when you start talking about this greater evolution of outsourcing. You start taking on common IT, start taking on the finance elements. And then 4PL is really the same as LLP. It's just now you own the procurement. So the distinction being you own per payment and you own per contract. So we try to drive some distinction in those terminologies. The language is not very clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, that's why I see sometimes people get caught up with kind of the terminology and the acronyms and everything else. And it really comes down to, what I always tell folks is, taking a step back and saying, almost like you alluded to in terms of what is your core competency, or thinking about the other way is, what is it that you're really looking for, right? What is it that, relative to whatever challenges you have or opportunities you're going after, what is it that you're looking for out of a partner, right? And I always distill it down. For most cases, and generally speaking, they're looking for the right mix of services, technology, and consulting in some ways, right? And to some extent, that's each customer, each potential, each manufacturer, retailer is going to have a different mix of what they're looking for. I love the 4 pillars that you outlined, and IT is one that in my perspective, I'd be curious what you think. That one's becoming, much bigger, if you will, today than it was in the past. And in many ways, I mean, I've said in the past where, in many ways, a lot of companies are looking at their logistics partners, regardless if you call them a 3PL or 4PL or whatever that's nature of relationship. Yeah. They're looking at those partners as providers of business intelligence and analytics, as much as they are looking for them as providers of those other 4 pillars. Do you see that as well?
Yeah, that's true, actually. And it's interesting how it's still, even that piece is somewhat in the rudimentary stage, because customers are really thinking, I think, mostly visibility. Where are my shipments, which somehow translates into basic track and trace, and they're looking for budgets. How much do I spend in logistics? Their systems and their networks are so fragmented, they can't even get consistent with those 2 pieces. So that's really where customers are pushing now. I want visibility, and I want to understand what I'm spending. But the reality of it is, from an IT perspective, this thing is, especially in the 4PL model, it's going much broader, right? There's really 3 other aspects we're looking at, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the alert management. Now I have actually elements within the system that say, if customs doesn't clear by this particular piece in the transit time, there's an alert. Or if a shipment doesn't transit at the cross dock at this particular time, there's an alert, right? So now it's starting to not only give you visibility of what's in the network, but when it occurs. And someone then can take action. And then once you've got this combination of data over a period of time, you can start to do some real forecasting, because reliably what elements of the network are working and which aren't. And now we start talking about asset management. Start talking about, all right, where should my inventory be? How much should I have? Because I know I have reliability in that lane. Or how should I schedule my resources for shipping and receiving? Because I know the reliability of that lane. Or even better, what is my warehouse size and my production planning going to look like? Because I know. So now we're starting about some pretty capital intensive elements of your supply chain that are being optimized by data visibility. And then you take it to the last point was optimization. You take all this data gathered from the forecasting perspective and you start saying, all right, what should my network look like? What plants should I have? What warehouses? What inventory? What modes of transport? What service levels? And you start to put all this data in to say, all right, let me truly say what my network should be like based on real data. You know, really anomaly that people don't understand on this is from the supplier side of this, just in RFQs, this will improve their business by 5%. Because in every RFQ the suppliers respond to, they put a contingency on that rate because they don't trust the data. And now you've got reliable data at the detailed level of which suppliers can truly price the network correctly on. And that alone is a real windfall. But you know, this data management piece and IT is so much broader, I think, than even customers are targeting it now. And our 4PL customers are starting to see that.
Yeah, no, those are great points. I mean, data quality management has always been, a critical piece, and I always view that as being, one of the big value propositions that a logistics service provider can bring to the table. And of course, now we're getting into things like predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics, right? So I think that's kind of the next wave, that we're going to see, moving forward. Where again, logistics service provider partners are going to be able to, play a key critical role there. Often when people think about 4PL relationships, they think about it kind of a one size fits all approach where a manufacturer retailer basically hands over the entire keys to the operations to the logistics service provider to plan and manage. I mean, is that a reality or a misconception? I mean, how much flexibility is there in a 4PL relationship?
Yeah, it's a real misconception because if I look at all the relationships we have in 4PL, I don't have a single one that's exactly the same. Every customer, based on their traditional way they've invested or what they believe is still their core competency or processes they want to outsource or keep, always ask for some different element of the solution. Just in the procurement space alone, there are relationships where the customer still has the contract. There are relationships where the customer has signature of the contract, but we actually do all the bid processes. There are customers that totally relinquish all responsibility of the contract, and we own it and we pay it, right? So just in that one element, there's a tremendous amount of flexibility. In IT, we have customers that want us to be the total end-to-end. There are customers that want you to tie into ERP and not be that. Some that want PO management, because the inbound is a real problem these days. And some don't, right? So there's somewhat validation, but some don't want payment. There's all kinds of aspects in that menu of services that we allow a customer to pick from. It's truly a menu. And they can add or drop services based on the value that they see. So actually, it's a total misconception. There's a lot of volatility and variability in the solution that is being implemented. And I think customers can really decide for their own what they think is important for them to do and not to do from an outsourcing perspective. And many customers also choose to do this. They don't do this all at once.
And I would think, and what I've seen as well is that not only is there, like I mentioned before, customers looking for that right mix of, services and IT capabilities and consulting and so forth, and each one's going to be different. But I think what I also see is that these relationships evolve over time. So maybe originally they might have you, own the procurement process, the whole thing. But then over time, a year down the road, 2 years down the road, they may want to bring aspects of it back in house, but then outsource other aspects of their operations. Do you see that as well? Is it being kind of like the relationships evolve and changing over time, where some things are that might have been originally outsourced, they bring it back in, and then things that they had it in-house originally, but then they say, okay, why don't you take ownership of this now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a concern of a lot of customers is that they don't have flexibility once they do this, right? And most of our customers actually do it in phases, right? They only pick pieces of those 4 elements and they do them over time, and they only pick certain geographies and do them over time, right? The Big Bang Theory in this kind of solution is usually more risky than it is valuable. But also a lot of customers are very concerned about what we call reversibility, right? How they can bring the business back in if they want to. And the key to that is just establishing the right commercial relationship and contractual design in the beginning, and that you build in that transition at the back end if you want to. But really, it depends on where they answered that first question on core competency. If they are truly bought in that this is not their core competency, then the future changes that they might make will only be from supplier to supplier, but they'll still have outsourced the solution, right? So they're more worried about how they can plug and play different partners than they are how do they bring back processes. But some truly want to think about how they bring back processes. And the two that are probably the ones they want to bring back quicker is procurement, but that's quite frankly easy to do with assignment and adoption elements of the contract, or IT, which is a little more difficult because you do have to build a migration plan for that information to come back into your internal systems. But you just build the right transition plan on the front end to allow you to do it. It doesn't happen very often, though. Most customers, once they feel like this is not their core competency, they're thinking about how they evolve it larger rather than how they reverse it back. But there always is a risk balance that they want to consider on the front end. They want to account for that, and they should.
Right. Yeah, that was going to be, my next point, which you just addressed. This whole, I guess, other misconception or thought that this is a one-way street. Once you go the 4PL route or outsource that, because you lose the people or the know-how, the technology, is very difficult to bring it back in. But I think to your point is number one is if you originally viewed this as not being a core competency. It's unlikely that the question isn't so much about bringing it back, but it's more around if it's not the right relationship in one dimension of it. But the other one is, it sounds like if you think through it as part of the nature of how you structure that relationship, you could do that. You could plan for that, right?
Right.
So, what are companies looking for today in a 4PL relationship? I mean, what are some of the attributes or capabilities they should look for in a partner, and how how have the expectations changed over the years?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll say first why they're looking. They're really, I would say there's probably 6 fundamental things that they're looking for. They want scale, a lot of them, from a rate perspective. They believe that potentially one of the partners in the business are bringing more logistics spend into the market than they are, which is true in most respects. They're looking for cost variability. They really want to push this into a multi-client environment to get more variability against their business than they have today. They're looking for fewer relationships. They have too many disparate, complicated procurement relationships, and they want that single throat to choke, or just a few partners of which they will manage their business. Some of them are looking for global coverage. They want to expand globally, and they just can't establish those relationships fast enough. And really, the emerging markets, more than anything, you've got a lot of dynamic big customers that require a lot of different services. It's not just air and ocean and ground and white glove and warehousing and building all those different relationships in a complicated country like India or Peru or Vietnam. They'd rather build a single relationship and have them do it for them, right? So that's kind of why they go. What kind of customers are doing it? It's really customers that are global. They have very complex networks, and they're really trying to satisfy what their customers are looking for. They've got customers with very capital-intensive manufacturing locations, and they need to have a very reliable supply chain, right? So they're really trying to establish something that satisfies their customer better than they do today with all these disparate relationships.
Now, do you see, and I love the way you broke it down into those reasons, because I see the same thing. Another area that I see that I'm wondering, I'd love to get your take on is, they're also looking at innovation, right? So, they're getting a lot of pressure from their own customers in terms of quote unquote innovating, whether it's, implementing new technology or experimenting with, whether it's blockchain, these things that you hear out there, or you're talking about using robotics or drones or, automation in the warehouse, whatever the case might be. And they, for a lot of the companies, they view their logistics service provider partners as an avenue to test out and pilot, these emerging processes and technologies, and do so in a much faster and more cost-efficient way than if they try to do that themselves internally and trying to get the budget, trying to get the people, the resources, everything else. So do you see that as well as innovation being another driver to working with a partner?
Absolutely, because it really goes back to that core competency question again, is where should they put their investment for their innovation? It should be in their business. And they're really trusting the logistics partner to drive that innovation within our businesses, right? And so they're expecting us and they're pushing us because it drives efficiency back to them on where we can generate new technologies and these new processes to improve their business. And really, that's less of even a 4PL element. That's really integrated within all the logistics solutions, down to the warehousing level and at the transportation level, whether it's dynamic routing or robotics or blockchain or whatever those elements are. They're really pervasive throughout our industry, but they're things that we have to drive and our customers are expecting us to drive, right? But one thing is differentiation with the 4PL level. Our customers are not really looking for commodity pricing anymore and commodity service. They're really looking for something that's providing innovation to the market, providing intellectual knowledge of where the market's going, understanding, what 5 years, 6 years, 10 years looks like, right? Those are questions we didn't get historically as 3PL, right? That you're getting much stronger at 4PL because the expectations are much greater because of the level of outsourcing.
No, great point. So that brings me to my next question. I mean, what defines, a successful, 4PL, customer relationship? I mean, what are the key ingredients that both parties need to bring to the table to make this a successful one?
Yeah, the customer has to have decided from the top down, this is the right thing for them to do, right? It really needs top level sponsorship because in most shippers, there's still a lot of disconnection between the plants, the countries, the logistics organizations, the procurement organizations, the inventory organizations, right? And if those organizations are really not aligned in terms of this is the strategy and to go march towards this and the value associated with it, then it becomes very complicated to implement, right? So the customer really has to have bought into it before they start. And I think that's a part of the success of it. I think the other is the 4PL has to be able to demonstrate value. It's a short-term project, but it's very much a long-term investment, right? And I think shippers have a tendency to think more short-term. How do I pay for this project? What are my immediate savings for this project? And those can occur and do occur, but this is really, when you talk about the optimization of forecasting and asset management, it's a much more longer-term project with longer-term value. And I think a lot of customers, if they focus on the short term, have a tendency to lose sight, right? So I think that's another success point as well, is really have to have a long-term view of it.
That's a great point, because I think when there's a lot of discussion in the industry, just in the 3PL industry, logistics outsourcing industry, in terms of, historically there was kind of this commodity, this view of, doing a reverse auction to get the lowest price from, so you're basically outsourcing, multi-million-dollar operations to the lowest cost bidder, right? I mean, you've seen that in the past where you have to scratch your head and say, how is this, happening? You're purely taking a very, cost-driven approach to outsourcing, which obviously gets a lot of companies in trouble. So I would think here, with the kind of taking that long-term perspective, the nature of these relationships by default ought to be long-term, right? I mean, I would guess that most of your agreements or relationships are, not the type that are going to get bid out every, year or every two or 3 years. They tend to be longer-term in nature.
I think all of mine are a minimum of 5 years, and some of them even longer. And even the ones that have been 5 years have extended beyond that. It's very much a long-term commitment. Now, again, the supplier needs to show value and shows value regularly, right? Through those 4 disciplines that we talked about earlier. But they're very much long-term partnerships. And that's probably the biggest part of the award process within the 4PL is there is an element of qualification. There is an element of, assessing the value, but really it gets into relationships. It's into trust. It's into culture. It's into or can you really build a partnership with this organization? It goes both ways. It's not just the shipper choosing the 4PL, it's vice versa as well. But it's very much a long-term item.
I love that last point, because that's so true. I mean, I think I've often said that, and what I've seen out there with those successful relationships is that, there really has to be an alignment of culture between the two organizations for it to fit together. And that, in many cases, the 4PLs, logistics service providers, are the most successful, are the ones that know which customers or prospective customers wouldn't be the right fit for them and actually turn away business,
right?
Because they say, our culture, our strategy, our vision is not aligned with yours, and this is what we look for in a client. And sometimes it takes discipline to turn away business, particularly if it's a sizable business. But I think knowing when you're setting yourself up for failure because you don't have that alignment, I think is critically important for both sides.
Very important.
So Matt, we're running short on time here, so I'm just going to go, right to my last question here. I mean, what questions should supply chain logistics executives ask themselves to determine or assess if going the 4PL relationship route is the right approach for them?
Yeah, I think if they're looking at their network today and saying, I'm not getting consistent standard information. I can't find it in the same place. It's not in the same format. It's coming in different ways. And I can't use that information to manage my business because of that. Then you've got the potential to really see value in a 4PL because 4PL will integrate that information for you. I think if they see they've got too many relationships, then that's another clear value. If they see that they're trying to get into markets that are difficult to do, if they see tasks and infrastructure in their business that aren't their core competency that they shouldn't be managed, and that an outsourced party should manage better. All these things, I think if they're starting to ask those questions, is this my core competence? Should I be owning these processes, these assets, of these resources, and all these relationships? I don't have the data to ride my business, and then they really potentially have the need for a 4PL.
Yeah, I think those are all great questions and good focus areas to think about, as they're making the decision on trying to figure out what the right path is, for them.
Right.
Matt, like I always say when we do these episodes, we always just manage to scratch the surface on these topics, but I think you provided some good clarity and information and advice in terms of how to be really thinking about some of the realities and misconceptions out there regarding the 4PL relationship. So thank you for making the time to be with us today.
No, thank you for inviting us.
And I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand at the Geodis website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Matt, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you all for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.